Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into something a little darker. We're exploring what life was really like as a male concubine in ancient China. A world of silk curtains, hidden chambers, and secret arrangements that most history books won't tell you about. Forget the romanticized tales of forbidden love you've seen in movies. The reality was far more complex, often brutal, and surprisingly strategic. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video if you enjoy these deep dives into history's forgotten corners. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see our community stretching across time zones. Now dim the lights, maybe grab a warm drink, and let's step back into a world where beauty was currency, desire was power, and survival meant learning to navigate the most dangerous game of all, court politics. Now close your eyes, take a deep breath, and prepare to spend the rest of your life as an ornamental curiosity in a world that barely acknowledges your existence. You are not a scholar, you are not a warrior, you are not even really a man in the way the outside world understands it. You are something more rare and infinitely more disposable, a pretty thing that breathes. You've been chosen. That's the word they use, chosen. As if this is some divine honour bestowed upon you for your virtue and inner beauty, instead of a cold transaction involving your family's desperation, your unusual looks, and the Empire's occasional appetite for variety. You're young, barely old enough to grow proper facial hair, and now you're the newest addition to someone's private collection of beautiful things. Congratulations, you're now property, specifically your decorative property, and the return policy expired the moment you walked through those gates. Maybe your family sold you outright. That's the most honest version of this story. Times were hard, you were pretty, and someone with money offered a price that could feed your siblings through the winter. Or maybe you were gifted to curry favour with a wealthy merchant, a provincial governor, or if you were particularly unfortunate, someone connected to the imperial court. A token of respect, a bargaining chip, an ornament that happens to have opinions it's not allowed to express. You said goodbye to your home under the eyes of neighbours who looked at you with a mixture of envy and pity. After all, being a male concubine means you'll never go hungry, but you'll also never go home. The journey to your new residence was long, silent, and supervised. You were not allowed to speak unless spoken to. You were not allowed to look anyone directly in the eye. And when you crossed the threshold of your new prison, the gates shut behind you with a weight that felt permanent. You've entered a world of carved screens, echoing corridors, and rules so intricate they have their own bureaucracy. Your name was logged, your background verified, your clothes replaced. Your reflection, if you were even allowed a mirror, already starting to disappear. The household you now belong to is a carefully constructed ecosystem of power, beauty, and silence. You'll live here, among other acquired treasures, some human, some not, all technically valued, all silently competing for scraps of attention. There is no brotherhood here, no solidarity, there is only hierarchy, and you are somewhere near the bottom of it. Your title for now is as generic as your new role. You're a companion, which means you spend most of your time being taught how not to offend people more important than you. This includes everyone. You learn the proper way to bow, not too low, not too stiff. You learn how to speak softly, slowly, and only when addressed. You learn how to walk gracefully, with steps that suggest refinement, but definitely not urgency. And you learn very quickly that opinions are not part of your new identity. You may be beautiful, you may even be clever, but cleverness is dangerous here. Beauty fades. Obedience, however, is forever. You sleep in a shared quarters, for now, with a few other new acquisitions. The beds are simple, the blankets adequate, and the silence absolute. Even at night, no one dares to whisper. There are ears everywhere. The walls have eyes and the servants pass silently through the halls, watching, recording, remembering. They're the enforcers of the rules, and their loyalty lies with whoever currently holds your contract. You try not to draw attention. You try not to cry. You're here now, and there's no going back. Every morning begins before sunrise, not because you're busy, but because showing discipline is more important than actually accomplishing anything. You're bathed, dressed, and arranged like a human flower arrangement. Your hair is combed into an acceptable style, your hands inspected for roughness. If they find a callus, you'll be reminded that your worth lies in your softness, not your productivity. You are meant to be pleasing, always pleasing, never loud, never tired, never real. Meals are served in careful silence. The food is good, better than what most of the empire eats, but it doesn't taste like anything anymore. You chew mechanically, you do not speak, you do not look up. You're being watched for posture, manners, and the subtle signs of defiance, which in this world could include something as simple as sighing too audibly. You've already been warned twice about your tone when thanking the kitchen staff. Next time, you might not eat at all. You're told this is a sacred duty, that to serve your master is the highest calling a man of your particular qualities can hope for. You smile, nod, and pretend to agree, but you know what this really is. You are here to be beautiful, to be still, to be quiet until called for, and then even quieter. Your worth is now determined by how well you fit into the aesthetic preferences of someone you may barely know, someone who may never even glance in your direction, and yet every hour of your day is shaped around that possibility. The senior concubines don't speak to you. They glide past you like lacquered ghosts, their expressions unreadable, their clothing flawless. They were once you. Now they are something else entirely. Power in silk robes, wearing perfume and subtle menace. If you're lucky, they ignore you. If you're not, they notice you. And that, as you'll soon learn, is rarely a good thing. One wrong glance, one misplaced compliment from a servant, and you could find yourself mysteriously reassigned to the kitchens for a month of reflection and silence. You wonder sometimes if anyone ever leaves. No one talks about it, but the answer is no. Not really. The gates you walked through are still there, but no one you know has walked back out. Some concubines become monks, some are quietly retired to distant estates, some simply vanish. You try not to think about it too much. You are here now, and that is all that matters. At night, you lie still in your narrow bed, staring up at the polished wood ceiling. You can't see the stars from here. You can't hear the wind. All you hear is the quiet shuffle of soft shoes on polished stone, the occasional cough, the distant echo of household life, continuing just out of reach. You close your eyes and try to imagine what freedom felt like. A breeze on your face, a loud laugh, the feeling of being wanted, not selected. That's over now. You are no longer a person in the way the outside world understands it. You are part of the collection, a whisper in your master's shadow, a name on a list, a potential ornament in a lineage you'll likely never understand. You belong to the household now, to its rituals, to its silence, and most of all, to its rules. Sleep well. You'll need the energy. The rest of your life is just beginning. It started with an inspection, not a warm welcome or a ceremonial introduction, but an inspection. You were told to stand straight, keep your eyes down, and remain perfectly still. Then came the eyes, dozens of them, all watching, all judging. A panel of household stewards, senior servants, and established concubines sat arranged in a crescent of embroidered authority. Their expressions were as unreadable as the household rules they enforced. You were not introduced. No one asked your name. They already knew it. It was written on the little scroll beside your feet, next to your province, your age, and a brief note about your family's financial desperation. The room was bright and echoing, with polished floors that made your footsteps sound embarrassingly loud. You tried to glide the way you'd been taught, quietly, like a falling petal, but you're fairly certain you came off more like a startled deer in slippers. Still, you made it to the centre of the chamber without tripping, which probably put you ahead of at least a few other boys. That thought was immediately followed by guilt, then anxiety, then the ever-present weight of nausea that came from having your entire future decided by people who hadn't said a single word to you. The lead steward stepped forward and began the examination. He didn't touch you, that would have been improper, but he gestured. You turned, you bowed, you lifted your sleeves, you opened your mouth. Your teeth were inspected from a safe distance, as though you might bite. You stood perfectly still, as your skin tone, posture, and general aesthetic bearing were discussed in hushed tones, by people wearing more jade than you'll probably ever own. You were judged not just by what you were, but by what you might become. Would you age well? Could you bear the isolation? Were your features delicate enough? Was your voice soothing enough? Did your silence suggest serenity, or simply a lack of wit? You were not the only one being examined that day. You and a dozen other boys were presented in sequence, all of you somewhere between 14 and 18, all of you wearing the same nervous expression, disguised behind layers of ceremonial powder. Every face bore the same haunted glaze, a kind of frozen half-smile worn by people trying to look graceful while being mentally graded like livestock. No one cried. That was considered disrespectful. Instead, you waited your turn, and when it came, you smiled. Not too broadly, not too coldly, and you stood in front of the tribunal while they decided if you were worthy of a life that most men would flee from, if given the chance. The chart was real. You weren't supposed to see it, but you did. A glance over the steward's shoulder as he marked something next to your name. There were categories: physical appearance, composure, bloodline, education, obedience potential. That last one had 3 subcategories, which you didn't have time to read, but you understood what they meant. You were being evaluated for your ability to follow orders, say thank you, and never, under any circumstances, speak unless someone richer than you made it explicitly clear that your voice was required. It rarely would be. There was no applause, no ceremony. Just a nod, a simple, measured nod from one of the senior concubines that told the others, "This one will do." And just like that, your fate was sealed. You were now officially on the path to becoming someone's beautiful accessory. You would be entered into the household roles, given a room in the lesser quarters, and subjected to the slow, methodical erosion of identity known as training. Somewhere, someone wrote your name in ink on a scroll. Somewhere else, your mother lit incense and prayed for your safety. You, however, just stood there, still smiling, still silent, still wondering if this was what success was supposed to feel like. Not everyone was so lucky. A few boys were dismissed before the end of the day. One had a stammer, another had scarred hands from farm work. One cried too much and was labelled temperamentally unstable, which in household language meant he was unlikely to make it through a week without unravelling or offending someone important. They were sent back, their families notified, their futures rerouted into far less prestigious forms of confinement. Maybe manual labour, maybe a monastery, or if the family had truly overreached, a quiet disappearance. They would not be remembered. You might have envied them in a distant, traitorous way. At least they got out. At least they were spared the velvet grindstone you are now stepping onto, because from this moment on, your life would not belong to you. It would belong to routines, to rankings, to whispers in hallways and passing glances in silk-draped corridors. You would be reshaped, repackaged, and presented again and again until someone with power decided what to do with you. Back in your quarters that night, you shared a celebratory bowl of sweet rice with the other selected boys. No one spoke, not because you weren't allowed, but because no one really had anything to say. What was there to celebrate exactly? That you were attractive enough to be accepted, but not so striking that you became an immediate threat. That you managed to appear submissive without seeming dull. That you would now spend the rest of your life in competition with other boys who smiled just like you, and dreamed the same dreams of safety disguised as status. As you sat in silence, a tiny part of you wondered what your master was doing at that very moment. Was he even aware that a new batch of boys had been processed? Did he care? Would he ever meet you? Would he remember your face, and would it matter if he didn't? You fell asleep that night knowing the answer to all of those questions, and you smiled anyway, because from now on, smiling is not a choice. It's part of your uniform. Your new residence is breathtaking. That's the first thing they want you to believe. Towering walls, gold-inlaid doors, courtyards lined with perfectly trimmed bamboo, and pavilions with upturned roofs that catch the sunlight like blades. Everything is symmetrical, calculated, and immaculately preserved. Not for comfort, but for control. This is the inner compound, a space of carefully curated beauty and unbearable confinement. The household may be a marvel of design, but the men's quarters, your quarters, is a maze of silk, suspicion, and unrelenting quiet. You've just moved into a place that's more beautiful than any prison you could have imagined, and also more inescapable. There are around 30 men here. You don't meet them all at once, of course. They're layered throughout the compound, like strata in a mountain, some barely visible, some towering overhead, and most of them quietly watching you from behind lacquered screens and perfectly applied face powder. You are one of the lowest ranks, which means you're somewhere near the base of this exquisite social pyramid. You live in the outer chambers, in a small shared suite with 2 other boys who look just as overwhelmed as you. Your belongings, which consist of precisely 1 trunk of standard-issue robes and a hair ornament made from cheaper silver, are arranged for you. You're instructed not to move them. Everything has a place. You have a place, whether you like it or not. The first thing you notice is the silence. It's not peaceful, it's not meditative, it's tactical. Every hallway, every garden, every shared dining space is lined with unspoken rules about who may speak, how loudly, and with what facial expression. You learn quickly that raised voices are not just frowned upon, they are recorded. Servants pass through regularly, not in a rush, but with the kind of purpose that suggests every casual stroll is a surveillance mission. Their eyes miss nothing, and they're not the only ones watching. Your fellow concubines observe everything. How you walk, who you stand next to, how you react to praise or correction. A misplaced smile can ruin you. An overheard sigh can earn you a demotion. You don't even sigh anymore. You've stopped blinking unless absolutely necessary. There are no mirrors in your room. That's not an accident. Mirrors are reserved for higher-ranking concubines, the ones who are trusted not to get too attached to what they see. Instead, you're allowed a polished brass plate that warps your reflection just enough to make you doubt whether you're truly as composed as you think you are. Your appearance is no longer for you anyway. It's a performance for the household, for your master, for the senior wife if she happens to pass through. You are not a man. You are a representative of your master's taste, a piece of decorative statecraft, a very quiet symbol of his wealth and sophistication. Or instability if you mess up. The rules are overwhelming, not because they're complicated, quite the opposite. They are rigid, memorized, and absolute. There is a correct way to walk. Your feet must never fully leave the ground. They should glide, not lift. There is a correct way to stand. Hands folded at the waist, eyes slightly downcast, back straight but not aggressively so. There is a correct way to enter a room, exit a room, pour tea, bow, speak, breathe. And if you think you can simply memorize these rituals and move on with your life, think again. The rules shift slightly, depending on who's in the room. The presence of a senior concubine changes everything. The master's wife changes more. And the master himself, he rewrites reality with a glance. Most days you don't see him. He is the sun, and you're one of a dozen small flowers, hoping to be warmed by a single passing ray of attention. You're aware of his existence, the way a peasant is aware of the distant court, theoretically, you might catch a glimpse at a ceremonial function, if you're lucky enough to be selected as decorative background material. You're expected to be honoured just to exist in his gravitational field, whether or not he acknowledges you. The few men who are called into his private chambers are escorted like rare artefacts, veiled, powdered, and handled by attendants with the care usually reserved for priceless porcelain. You, however, are not priceless. Not yet. Your days are structured like a bureaucrat's fever dream. You wake before dawn, you dress in silence, you attend posture instruction, then etiquette instruction, then calligraphy practice, which is less about creating anything useful and more about cultivating an air of quiet, refined patience. You learn poetry, not to write it, but to quote it at the right moment during household gatherings. You study music, not to perform, but to sit attractively next to someone who does. Your entire education is designed to make you presentable, manageable, and strategically appealing. You are being trained to exist beautifully and invisibly at the same time. Meals are communal but not social. You eat in long, narrow halls where speaking is discouraged, and glancing around too much is interpreted as nosiness. Each boy is allotted a designated spot at the table based on his current favourability score. Not officially, of course, but everyone knows how it works. The better you're standing, the closer you sit to the head of the room. The lower your status, the more time you spend staring at the wall. The food is rich, but you've stopped enjoying it. Eating is just another performance. Don't eat too quickly, don't eat too little. Don't look like you enjoy it more than the man next to you. Someone is always watching. There are no friendships here. At best, you form temporary alliances based on mutual survival. At worst, you smile at someone during breakfast, only to discover later that they reported you for stepping out of line during a tea ceremony. The worst part is they weren't lying. You did step out of line. You were one toe too far left. You were one blink too slow, and that's all it takes. That night, you lie in bed and think about how much time has passed. You're not sure anymore. A week? A month? Time moves differently here. The seasons change, but you never feel the wind. You never hear the rain. Your world is walled off from everything except protocol. You exist behind carved screens and silk curtains, surrounded by whispers and walking on eggshells made of lacquered etiquette. Sometimes you dream of running, but there's nowhere to go. You're now part of what they call the house of refined companions. It sounds important, but really, it just means you're part of the collection your master occasionally enjoys looking at, or might or won't. The name gives the illusion of dignity to something far more transactional. You are one of many, interchangeable, ranked, reviewed, rarely remembered, but still expected to be radiant, calm, and delighted to be here. And yet you keep smiling, because not smiling is suspicious, because crying is punishable, because there's no mirror to remind you what you look like anymore. Just the echo of your own silence, bouncing between painted walls, polished floors, and the 1,000 unspoken expectations of a household that never truly sleeps. Congratulations, you've made it. You're now an official male concubine, which is a little like being promoted from ornament to slightly fancier ornament. You're no longer in training, no longer a hopeful name on a chart, no longer sleeping 3 to a room in the outer quarters. Now you sleep 2 to a room, and your mattress is slightly less uncomfortable. You've been given a new robe in a slightly richer shade of blue, and a hair ornament made of real, albeit poorly cut, jade. Most importantly, you have a number. Not a name, not a title, a rank, recorded in ink, stored in a ledger, maintained by someone who probably resents you for existing. The household ranking system for male concubines is both dazzlingly complex and depressingly efficient. At the very top, you have the master's wife, one woman to rule them all. Below her are the favoured female concubines, arranged in their own elaborate hierarchy of silk and spite. Then come the senior male concubines, men like you technically, but elevated through years of careful positioning and strategic charm. These men wear robes dyed in hues you're not even allowed to look at directly, and their headdresses defy both gravity and reason. Then come the regular male concubines, men like you, technically part of the hierarchy, but treated more like ornamental background music. And below you are the household servants, who clean, serve, and know everything you say when you think no one's listening. So yes, you outrank someone, but don't let it go to your head. Each rank comes with its own colour palette, living quarters, schedule, and etiquette manual. You've received yours all, a tidy stack of bamboo slips outlining exactly when you may leave your quarters, how far you may walk, and which direction to bow when passing a superior. Your meals are no longer communal, but delivered by a servant whose politeness is directly proportional to how well liked you currently are. The better you're standing, the warmer the soup. You've had lukewarm soup for 3 days now, which means someone important either forgot you exist or is subtly reminding you that you're replaceable. The higher-ranking concubines don't speak to you, and you wouldn't dare speak to them unless invited. You see them occasionally, gliding through the courtyards in procession, surrounded by attendants and small judgmental cats that seem to know exactly who has power and who doesn't. Their gowns are stitched with golden thread and symbols of mythical authority. Yours has chrysanthemums and fraying cuffs. Their tea is served in porcelain so fine it could probably file your taxes. Yours comes in a cup that has, at least once, been repaired with lacquer and regret. Your job, officially, is to be available. Available for what depends on your master's mood, the calendar, and a household system that views male attention as a limited commodity to be rationed and rotated. When your name comes up, and it might eventually, you'll be summoned for grooming, dressed by attendants, and presented for inspection like a ceremonial vase. If you're chosen, you may spend an evening in your master's private chambers. If not, you return to your quarters and practice looking grateful. This process is called favour, and it determines everything from what food you eat to whether you're addressed as respected companion or simply you. Falling out of favour is easy, rising is not. Favour can be lost for any number of reasons. Poor posture, poor timing, an unflattering comment from a jealous rival, or simply existing on a day when someone else was more interesting. Gain favour, and your room is moved closer to the master's residence. Lose it, and you're quietly relocated to the far wing of the compound, where the hallways are drafty and the staff forgets your meal preferences. You've already memorised which direction the hot tea comes from. It has yet to come from you. There are punishments, of course. You don't get demoted with a letter. You're reassigned, reprimanded, or simply removed from rotation. If you speak out of turn or offend someone above your station, which includes nearly everyone, you may find yourself assigned to laundry detail. Laundry duty in the compound is less about folding linens and more about scrubbing the outer garments of people who very much want to forget you ever existed. You'll be reminded of your place with every wet sleeve and every whisper passed between senior servants. Beatings are rarer, but not unheard of. Physical punishment isn't given lightly. It leaves marks, after all. But humiliation is its own kind of violence. You've seen it. A concubine demoted publicly, stripped of his ornaments, made to stand in the cold until he fainted. The lesson is clear. Your dignity is conditional. Your rank is temporary, and the household has a long memory for insolence and a very short one for your better days. And yet, despite all this, you start to learn how to navigate. You study the patterns, you learn which concubines are favoured and which ones are falling out. You memorise the preferences of mid-ranking servants who control access to the master's schedule. You begin offering carefully phrased compliments that sound sincere but are vague enough not to be weaponised. You don't trust anyone, but you smile at everyone. You perfect the art of being pleasant and forgettable, which for someone at your level is safer than being memorable. You're allowed a few personal items now. A fan with painted plum blossoms, a hair ribbon from home, a small scroll of poetry you can recite when the room is too quiet, and you need to remind yourself that language still exists. You arrange these things carefully, not because they bring you joy, but because they're yours. Everything else, your robes, your quarters, your role, belongs to the household. You've begun to understand that being a male concubine is not about love or even attraction. It's about visibility. Your master can elevate you with a single glance, but most of the time, he doesn't look at all. You are part of the machinery, a living ornament, somewhere between furniture and flora. You're not the wife, not a servant, not even a reliable confidant. You're a symbol, a number, a controlled variable in the household experiment that is this compound. But for now, you still have your rank, low as it is. It's something, and in a place where people vanish for being inconvenient, sometimes surviving unnoticed, is its own form of victory. You wake up before the sun, not because anyone expects anything productive from you, but because being awake early is considered virtuous. You dress in silence, assisted by a servant who barely looks at you unless you commit a mistake. He ties your sash a little too tightly today. Maybe he's annoyed, maybe he's just bored. You don't ask. Asking would imply that you deserve an answer. You sit down for your morning grooming, hair combed, face powdered, posture adjusted, like a porcelain doll being positioned on a shelf. It's not for anyone in particular, it's just what's expected. Every day begins like this, not with purpose, but with preparation for the possibility of purpose. You eat breakfast at a lacquered table with two other concubines whose names you remember only because they've been assigned the same walking schedule. No one speaks unless someone very important walks by, in which case you all laugh softly and politely, as if the past 15 minutes of dead silence were simply an oversight. The food is delicate and artfully arranged, congee, pickled radish, steamed bun, but none of it tastes like much anymore. You eat slowly, eyes down, hands folded when not in use. You have learned that enthusiasm is suspicious, appetite even more so. Then comes the waiting, always the waiting. Officially it's called leisure time, but there's nothing leisurely about it. You sit in the courtyard or in one of the interior parlours, depending on the weather. You embroider flowers you will never wear, write poetry you can't share, and sip tea that's been reheated just enough to count as warm. You do this while looking calm, content, and slightly ethereal, because someone may walk by, and if they do, you need to look like someone worth remembering. But not too memorable, just enough to seem pleasant, just enough to seem safe. There are activities, if you can call them that. You attend tea ceremonies where you sit on the edge of silk cushions and pretend to care deeply about the exact angle at which the teapot is held. You participate in music sessions where instruments are tuned more often than played. You join calligraphy classes where the senior concubines gently correct your brushstrokes while evaluating the tone of your posture. None of these are optional. None of them are enjoyable. They're theatre, elaborate, slow-moving theatre meant to display your elegance, your refinement, your utter lack of personal ambition. You're allowed to walk twice a day, provided you follow the designated paths and do not stray from the route. You walk in pairs or small groups, always in silence unless addressed. The garden paths are beautifully maintained, with rock arrangements, bonsai trees, and ponds so pristine they might be lacquered. It should be peaceful, but you know better than to mistake stillness for serenity. Everything here is staged, every tree trimmed, every koi pond a reflection of hierarchy. Even the squirrels seem to understand protocol. The rest of the day is spent either sitting or pretending not to eavesdrop. Conversations in the compound are currency, and everyone is bankrupt until proven otherwise. You overhear fragments. Someone was moved to better quarters, Someone else has been reassigned to food preparation. Another has developed a mysterious cough that may or may not be politically convenient. You don't ask questions, you file it all away. If something's important, it will come back around. If not, it's still useful to know what happened when someone vanishes. You're summoned occasionally, though never for anything exciting. A servant might appear to inform you that your presence is required at a cultural recital, where you will sit on a stool for 2 hours, watching a minor court musician play the guqin while someone translates the lyrics of a tragic poem you're not allowed to react to emotionally. Or you may be asked to assist a higher-ranking concubine with his attire, which is less a request and more a reminder that he outranks you, and you are here to reflect his importance. You smile and hold the mirror. He doesn't thank you. You don't expect him to. Your master, of course, does not appear. He is busy with the affairs of business, or so you're told. On rare occasions, you hear his footsteps in the central corridor, always accompanied by a small procession of servants and advisors. You bow as he passes, holding the pose until your knees ache. He doesn't look at you. You don't expect him to. Still, you wonder what would happen if he did. You imagine him noticing you, not in a sweeping romantic gesture, but in a brief flicker of interest. Just enough to change your rotation. Just enough to make the hours of posture and powder lead somewhere. Evenings are the most unbearable part of the day. There's a long stretch between dinner and lights out, where you're supposed to engage in refined personal development. That means more embroidery, more poetry, more sitting in heavily scented rooms, pretending not to feel the stale perfume cling to your skin. Sometimes a senior concubine will perform a recitation or demonstration, a calligraphy piece, a story, a lesson in flower arranging. You sit through these performances like a student in a never-ending finishing school, applauding with appropriate politeness, careful not to clap louder than the others. You go to bed when you're told, not a moment sooner. You lie still, back straight, eyes open to the dark ceiling above. There is no moonlight here. The windows are shuttered. The walls are thick. The silence is total. The only sound is the occasional shuffle of a servant's slippers, or the quiet cough of another man down the hall. You think about tomorrow. It will be identical to today. The same waking, walking, waiting. The same meals. The same posture drills. The same emotional neutral zone you must maintain to survive. You begin to understand that you're not a man in the traditional sense anymore. You are part of a ceremonial function, a moving, breathing, beautifully dressed afterthought. The household runs on structure, and you are one of the replaceable cogs. You're not expected to create anything. You're expected to exist gracefully, endlessly, and without complaint. Time here is measured not in days, but in promotions that never come, and punishments that always do. Still, you hold yourself carefully. You speak only when prompted. You smile just enough, because in this place, that's what daily life is. A performance of perfection played for an audience that rarely bothers to look. There is a schedule, of course there is. In a household where your daily walk is timed and your tea temperature practically legislated, it makes perfect sense that your master's intimate life would run on something resembling a bureaucratic timetable. At the beginning of every lunar month, the senior steward of personal affairs prepares a list, a neat, orderly chart with the names of concubines selected for night duty. The rotation is determined by rank, recent favour, political alliances, and the occasional whim disguised as a strategic decision. You're not informed directly. Instead, your servant begins brushing your hair a little more carefully, and the soup improves. That's how you know. The day your name appears on the list, the air around you changes. People who ignored you last week now look at you with thin smiles. A few fellow concubines grow suspiciously complimentary. One even gives you a piece of candied plum from his private stash, which is less an act of kindness and more a subtle way of asking to be remembered if things go well for you. The higher-ranking men don't acknowledge you at all, which is somehow worse. It means you're not seen as a threat. It means they're certain your night will be uneventful, or short-lived, or both. You're summoned to the bathing hall at dusk, not to bathe yourself, of course. That task belongs to the attendants, who scrub you with a precision that suggests they're trying to polish you into something less human. You're washed in water scented with jasmine petals, and rinsed until your skin feels fragile, like stretched rice paper. Your hair is oiled and styled in a complicated arrangement you're not expected to maintain. Your nails are cleaned, your cheeks dusted, your lips tinted with crushed flour paste. The goal is to make you look ethereal, otherworldly, and above all, pleasing in candlelight. Not too bold, not too dull, just enough to suggest warmth without any actual personality. The robes they give you are not the kind you wear during the day. These are thinner, more ornamental than functional. Silk that slides when you move, embroidery that catches the light just enough to suggest luxury. You're not expected to speak unless spoken to. You're not expected to initiate anything. You are, in essence, a ceremonial object, an offering. Not of love, not even of companionship, just of availability. You're escorted across the compound in a covered palanquin, flanked by 2 servants who have seen this ritual hundreds of times and maintain the detached demeanour of people transporting expensive furniture. When you arrive at your master's quarters, you're announced but not welcomed. The inner chamber is quiet, the screens are closed. You wait on a cushion while the servants finish their arrangements. Then they bow, step out, and leave you in silence. Sometimes your master appears immediately. Sometimes you wait an hour. Sometimes you wait longer, and he never comes at all. There are evenings when he's delayed by business matters or distracted by someone else higher on the list. On those nights, you return to your room without comment, your effort evaporating into the silence like the jasmine water you were scrubbed in. If he does arrive, the tone is not romantic. This isn't a secret rendezvous or a scene from a novel. It's more like a diplomatic meeting in soft lighting. He may speak, he may not. He might ask about your province, your calligraphy practice, or whether you've heard the latest gossip about the neighbouring estates. He might want music, he might want silence. You respond with the balance of polite attentiveness and complete emotional neutrality. Too warm, and you're presumptuous. Too cold, and you're ungrateful. Your entire future could rest on how convincingly you react to a passing comment about tea preferences. Then comes the part you've been prepared for, but not really prepared for. It is efficient, unemotional, sometimes clinical. You've been taught that intimacy is a sacred duty, a chance to please your master, to elevate your standing, to serve in the most personal sense. But in reality, it feels more like clocking in for a shift you didn't ask for. There is no affection, there are no whispered promises. You lie still, you smile faintly, you try not to breathe too loudly. When it's over, you wait for the signal to leave. Sometimes he falls asleep before you do. Sometimes he leaves you staring at the ceiling while he talks about irrigation reforms or the price of silk. You are not here to be loved. You are here to be tolerated in elegant silence. You return to your quarters, escorted by the same servants. Your ornate robes now slightly rumpled, your hair slightly out of place, and your mind somewhere between numb and exhausted. No one says anything the next morning. No one congratulates you. Your schedule resumes as if nothing happened. The other men watch you out of the corners of their eyes, but no one asks questions. They've all done it. They all know. The only evidence that the night occurred is a slight change in your standing. Maybe your meals improve. Maybe you're reassigned to a better embroidery group. Maybe nothing changes at all. And you're left wondering if the whole thing was just a quiet exercise in household maintenance. Like oiling a door hinge, no one notices until it squeaks. You start to realise that your master himself, this figure you've been trained to serve and impress, is more of a concept than a person. He's a moving part of a much larger machine. And your proximity to him doesn't guarantee attention, affection, or even memory. You were there, you did what was required, and now you wait again, just like before, for the next time your name might appear on the list. If it does, you'll go through it all again. The bath, the powder, the robe, the silence. If it doesn't, you'll spend your days as you always do, stitched into the tapestry of the household, smiling at no one in particular, performing elegance on a schedule that never ends. The politics of the male quarters are different from what you might expect. Unlike the women's section, where beauty and fertility creates clear hierarchies, your world operates on more subtle currencies. Charm, yes, but also usefulness, entertainment value, the ability to make your master feel sophisticated without ever making him feel threatened. You exist in a delicate ecosystem where everyone understands that you're all fighting for scraps of the same attention. But the fight must never look like fighting. It must look like friendship, like mutual support, like a gentle competition between brothers who only want the best for each other. The lies are exhausting. The senior concubines, the ones who've survived long enough to accumulate small privileges, form the unofficial council that governs your daily life. They decide who sits where during meals, who gets assigned to which tasks, who receives warnings, and who receives recommendations. They don't have official authority, but they have something more dangerous: experience. These men have learned to navigate the currents of favour with the skill of seasoned diplomats. They know when to speak and when to vanish, when to offer help and when to let someone drown quietly. They've survived purges, preference changes, and the arrival of younger, prettier replacements. They are not your friends, even when they smile at you, especially when they smile at you. There's Chen, who's been here for 8 years and has perfected the art of being indispensable without being irreplaceable. He speaks 3 languages, writes elegant poetry, and plays the guqin well enough to provide background music during intimate dinners. More importantly, he remembers everyone's birthday, knows which servants can be trusted with messages, and never, ever repeats gossip unless it serves a purpose. Chen doesn't like you, but he doesn't dislike you either. To him, you're simply another variable to manage, another piece on a board where the rules change without warning. He offers you advice sometimes, small practical things about posture or protocol, not because he cares about your success, but because your failure could reflect poorly on his judgment. Then there's Wei, who arrived 2 years ago with the kind of ethereal beauty that makes grown men stop mid-sentence. He's learned to weaponize his looks with surgical precision, deploying a carefully timed glance or a perfectly choreographed smile to devastating effect. Wei understands that beauty fades, so he's been cultivating other skills. Massage, conversation, the ability to listen without judgment while someone more powerful confesses their fears. Wei sees you as competition, which makes him dangerous. He's too smart to sabotage you directly, but he's not above orchestrating small embarrassments. A servant who forgets to deliver your clean robes, a scheduling conflict that keeps you from an important tea ceremony, a subtle comment about your pronunciation that plants seeds of doubt in the right ears. You learn to navigate these relationships with the caution of someone walking through a room full of sleeping vipers. You offer compliments that sound sincere, but reveal nothing about your own ambitions. You accept help graciously, while assuming it comes with hidden costs. You remember favours and repay them with interest, not because you're grateful, but because debt is dangerous in a place where everyone keeps detailed mental ledgers. The newest arrivals cluster together for protection, forming temporary alliances based on shared confusion and mutual terror. They whisper in the bathing halls about escape plans that will never materialise and revenge fantasies against families who sold them. They don't last long. Either they adapt to the silence and isolation, or they crack in ways that require discreet removal from the premises. You were one of them once, huddled with other boys who still smelled like home, still flinched at every footstep, still believed that good behaviour might earn them mercy. Now you watch the new ones with a mixture of sympathy and detachment. You remember that innocence, but you can't afford to indulge it. Innocence is a luxury you've learned to live without. The servants who manage your daily life are players in this game too, though they pretend to be neutral. They control information, access, and small comforts that can make the difference between misery and mere unhappiness. The smart ones cultivate relationships with multiple concubines, playing all sides while committing to none. The foolish ones pick favourites and inevitably find themselves caught in the crossfire when alliances shift. Your personal servant, Liu, is somewhere in between. He's efficient, discreet, and carefully polite, but you've caught him watching you with the calculating gaze of someone trying to decide whether you're worth the investment of his attention. He brings you news sometimes. Which concubine has been reassigned? Which servant has been dismissed? Which rumours are worth believing? You accept this information with appropriate gratitude, while wondering what he expects in return. The master's wife occupies a space above all of this drama, but her presence affects everything. She doesn't involve herself in the male quarters directly, but her moods ripple through the household, like weather patterns. When she's pleased, everyone breathes easier. When she's angry, even the senior concubines walk more quietly and speak in softer tones. You've seen her exactly 3 times, always from a distance, always while bowing so low your vision was limited to her silk shoes and the hem of her robe. She moves through the compound like a force of nature, not malicious exactly, but utterly indifferent to anything that doesn't directly concern her comfort or status. You are furniture to her, decorative and functional, but ultimately replaceable if you cease to serve your purpose. The master himself remains largely abstract, a figure more discussed than seen. When he does appear in your spaces, it's usually for ceremonial occasions or inspections that feel more like inventory checks than social visits. He may nod at 1 or 2 of the senior concubines, acknowledge a particularly skillful performance, or simply pass through without comment. You've learned not to take his attention or lack thereof personally. He exists in a different atmosphere than you do, breathing rarefied air that's filtered through layers of protocol and political consideration. Your job is not to understand him, but to be available when understanding is required of you. The real danger comes not from grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but from the slow accumulation of small failures. A comment misinterpreted, a bow held for the wrong duration, a smile that seems too calculated or not calculated enough. In the women's quarters, mistakes might be forgiven if the woman in question is beautiful or useful enough. In the men's quarters, forgiveness is rarer and always conditional. You've seen men disappear for infractions that seemed minor, speaking too loudly during a poetry recitation, wearing a hair ornament slightly askew, expressing an opinion about politics when asked directly. They don't vanish dramatically. They simply stop appearing at meals, their rooms are quietly reassigned, and their names are gradually omitted from conversation until it's as if they never existed at all. This is the reality you navigate daily, a world where kindness is tactical, where beauty is currency, where survival depends on your ability to be simultaneously memorable and invisible, charming and sexless, present and absent. You smile when you're supposed to smile, you speak when you're supposed to speak, and you disappear into the silk-lined shadows when anything more complicated is required. And through it all, you maintain the fiction that this is a life worth living, that the small privileges you've earned, the slightly better tea, the marginally more comfortable bedding, the occasional nod of approval from someone who matters, justify the price you've paid for them. Because the alternative, acknowledging what you've lost, what you'll never get back, what you've become, is a luxury you can't afford. Not here, Not now, not ever. The eunuchs are everywhere, and they see everything. If the male concubines exist in a state of beautiful powerlessness, the eunuchs occupy the opposite end of the spectrum. They are ugly power, made efficient through mutilation and utterly loyal through necessity. They are the oil in the machine, the eyes in the walls, and the mouths that repeat everything they shouldn't but somehow always do. They know what time you woke up this morning, how many dumplings you ate, and who stopped by your quarters under the pretense of borrowing a poetry scroll. They see everything, forget nothing, and remember to remind you of both whenever it benefits them. A eunuch escorted you into the compound on your first day. A eunuch wrote your name into the registry, checked your teeth, and assigned you your first robe. And since then, every single moment of your daily life has been organised, observed, or outright orchestrated by men who no longer pose a sexual threat to anyone, and who have, in exchange, been granted sweeping influence over those who do. Their status is precarious, their power absolute. You fear them. Everyone does. They are not all the same, of course. The household eunuchs are a hierarchy within a hierarchy, and their ranks are just as elaborate as yours. Some serve as chamber attendants, others manage food preparation, still others maintain the baths or coordinate ceremonial functions. But the real power belongs to the senior eunuchs, the ones in charge of your master's schedule, the ones who control the rotation of concubines, who know which boy is rising and which one is just days away from a conveniently timed illness. These men don't just carry information, they curate it, and if you're not careful, you could find yourself edited right out of the narrative. If you're smart, you learn early on which eunuchs matter and which ones merely deliver fruit. The ones who walk slowly through the gardens at odd hours, who glance at the concubines as they pass but never speak. Those are the ones worth watching. Their silence is louder than most conversations. Their loyalty lies not with you or anyone like you. It lies with whoever holds power, and if that changes, so do their allegiances. They can pivot faster than a concubine caught smiling at the wrong banquet guest. You may be tempted to befriend one. That's understandable. You're surrounded by rivals and half-friends who would sell your secrets for the promise of warmer soup. The eunuchs, by contrast, seem practical, even kindly at times. One might slip you an extra steamed bun, another might accidentally mention that your name has been coming up more often in the inner chamber discussions. You may think this is a sign of trust. It's not. It's a test. Everything they do is a test. They want to know how much you'll offer in return. Gossip, gratitude, favours, secrets. The exchange rate changes daily. Still, alliances with eunuchs are sometimes necessary. You want someone to whisper your name in the right ear, to recommend you for the next festival procession, to casually mention that your calligraphy has improved. These small nudges can shift your entire trajectory, and if you're lucky, or very careful, you can secure the favour of a senior eunuch who will look out for you when the political tides shift. But the danger lies in forgetting who they really work for. They're not your friends. They're middlemen in a system that has no interest in your survival beyond its usefulness. And then there's the gossip. Oh, the gossip. Eunuchs are the grand archivists of household scandal. They know everything. Who's been visiting whom, who's fallen out of favour, who was overheard weeping behind the garden wall. They swap stories like merchants trade silk, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes painfully accurate. If you want to know what's really happening in the compound, don't ask another concubine. Watch which eunuch is smiling too much and which one stops making eye contact. Of course, the gossip comes with a price. If you're caught listening too closely, asking too many questions, or reacting too visibly to a juicy bit of news, it will be noted. You'll be marked as someone who knows too much, and in this place, that's never a compliment. Information is dangerous. It gives you a temporary sense of control right before it's used against you. The punishments, when they come, often start with eunuchs. They arrive unannounced, holding scrolls or orders you don't get to read. They escort you away from your quarters for questioning. They confiscate your belongings, claiming an inventory check. They relay accusations in tones so calm they sound more like reminders than charges. And they never, ever raise their voices. That's the worst part. Their control is terrifying because if a eunuch is angry, you won't know it until you're already kneeling in a cold room being informed that your services are no longer required. You've seen it happen. A concubine says the wrong thing to the wrong eunuch, and the next day he's missing from morning roll call. His quarters are swept clean. His name is never mentioned again. Some say he was reassigned to a temple, others say he was sent home. Still others whisper that he was found guilty of sowing discord, a catch-all phrase that means someone powerful wanted him gone, and a eunuch made it happen. But despite all this, you still rely on them, because you have to. They deliver your food, arrange your appearances, announce your name at household functions. They determine which physician you see, which gifts make it to your hands, and which do not. Without them, you are invisible. With them, you are at risk. There is no safe distance, just calculated proximity. And so you learn to navigate. You speak with respect, you offer subtle compliments, you remember which eunuchs like lotus seed cakes and which prefer sandalwood incense. You don't lie to them, at least not obviously, and you don't tell them the full truth unless you've already rehearsed what they'll do with it. You listen more than you speak, you observe, and you never forget that the man holding your bath towel this morning may be the same man who decides where you'll be sleeping next week. In the end, eunuchs are the quiet architects of your survival. They don't rule, they don't reign, but they guide the flow of power like wind through silk, unseen but undeniable. And while they may not carry swords, they know exactly where to cut. You've heard the stories, of course. Everyone has. Your master may hold the deeds to the land and the authority over the household, but within the walls of the inner compound, it's his mother who decides which way the wind is blowing. The dowager, though no one uses that title to her face, is not just the mother of your master. She's the mother of every rule you've been forced to memorize, every protocol that governs your daily existence. Her authority here is absolute, unchecked, and as changeable as the weather. Except the weather rarely demands silence with a single raised eyebrow. She lives in a suite so opulent it's practically its own kingdom, draped in curtains embroidered with phoenixes and stitched with silk so fine it could probably pass through a needle on its own. No one visits her uninvited, no one leaves her presence unchanged. If the compound is a battlefield, then the dowager is the general who doesn't need to shout orders. Her mood determines the tone of the day. If she's pleased, the corridors seem brighter, the eunuchs move faster, and the senior concubines smile, just a little more often. If she's displeased, the entire household holds its breath. No one speaks above a whisper. No one suggests anything. Even the birds in the garden seem to chirp less. It's not fear exactly, though there's plenty of that, but reverence laced with the constant awareness that a woman who rose to the top of this hierarchy didn't do so by being merciful. You may never speak to her directly. Most concubines don't, but that doesn't mean you're off her radar. The dowager has a network of informants, more sophisticated than anything the imperial court could dream of. Maids, eunuchs, senior concubines, and even visiting relatives all report to her, directly or indirectly. She knows which boy cried during his third etiquette lesson. She knows who's been hoarding candy ginger, who's been slipping out of his quarters at odd hours, and who's been asking too many questions about promotion protocols. She may not act on all of it, but she doesn't forget anything. She files it away until it's useful. Her opinions are less like statements and more like sentences handed down from a court that doesn't bother with appeals. If she declares that a certain concubine is troublesome, that boy will find himself demoted within days. If she remarks offhandedly that someone has a pleasant singing voice, that person's rotation suddenly improves. It's not just her words either. It's her expressions, her silences, the way she sips her tea. When the dowager narrows her eyes, careers end. When she smiles, it's either a blessing or a trap. Sometimes both. The most unsettling part is how little you can do to influence her favour. With your master, at least there's a performance, you know. Be pleasing, be poised, be just mysterious enough to seem worth his time. But with the dowager, it's impossible to predict what will work. She might value obedience today and boldness tomorrow. She might admire humility in one boy and call it weakness in another. You can try to impress her by being quiet, efficient, respectful, but then again, she might find that forgettable. And nothing is more dangerous in her eyes than someone who wastes space. You've only seen her once, briefly, at a seasonal festival. She arrived flanked by attendants, wearing robes so heavily embroidered they looked more like tapestries than clothing. She moved slowly, but there was no mistaking the force of her presence. Everyone bowed the moment she appeared, not the polite, ceremonial kind of bow you give your master, but the deep, spine-stretching version that says, "Please, for the love of all that is sacred, don't let me offend you." You didn't even look at her directly. No one did. You stared at the floor, heart pounding, and hoped your posture was acceptable. She walked past without a glance, and it was somehow a relief and a disappointment all at once. Your servant once told you, in the kind of whisper that means he regretted it immediately, that the dowager wasn't always like this, that she had once been young, clever, and quietly ambitious. She rose through the ranks not by seduction or charm, but by being the last woman standing in a household full of rivals who underestimated her. When the old master died and her son inherited everything, she moved into her new chambers with the kind of calm assurance that comes from knowing the war is over and she is the victor. She rarely leaves her quarters now, except for the occasional ceremonial appearance or disciplinary matter. When she does, the entire compound seems to shrink in her presence. Concubines adjust their hair, eunuchs bow lower, conversations stop mid-sentence. She walks slowly, but with absolute purpose. She is old, but never weak. Her hands may tremble, but her decisions do not. And every time you hear her name, it comes with a silence afterward. The kind that says, "Be careful." Sometimes she intervenes directly. A concubine receives a promotion not because the master asked for him, but because the dowager recommended it. Another is stripped of his privileges, escorted out of the compound under vague accusations, his belongings boxed and burned. These decisions are not explained. They are simply carried out. You learn not to ask why. You learn to say, thank you for things you didn't request, and apologize for things you didn't do. You fantasize occasionally about what it might be like to gain her favor, to be invited into her private chambers, to serve her tea, to earn a nod of approval from the one person who could protect you with a sentence. But those fantasies are short-lived, because you also know what happens when she disapproves. And you've seen what's left behind when she decides a concubine no longer belongs in the story. In this compound, there are many people with power, some through beauty, some through cunning, some through proximity to your master, but none of them hold a candle to the dowager. Her power isn't borrowed, it isn't conditional, it doesn't depend on favour or fashion. It just is unshakable, immovable, and terrifyingly silent. You don't pray for her affection. You pray that she never notices you at all. It doesn't happen all at once. That's the cruel part. There's no announcement, no grand declaration, no formal demotion ceremony where someone tells you your time is up. Falling out of favour in the compound is a slow, quiet unravelling. One day you don't get summoned. You think nothing of it. He was probably busy, affairs of business, or perhaps it was just another boy's turn. But then it happens again, and again. Weeks pass, you're still painted, perfumed, and placed in public view during ceremonial functions, but no glances come your way. You are not mentioned, you are not requested, you are not remembered. The first sign is subtle, your robes. You've had the same rotation of garments for months, but suddenly they're replaced with a new set. Less vibrant, a little stiffer. The embroidery is simpler. At first you assume it's just seasonal, but then you notice that the quality of fabric is lower, the stitching looser. You bring it up gently with your servant. He nods, offers no explanation, and changes the subject. That's when you know the household is beginning to forget you. Or worse, it's choosing to. Then the food changes. Not drastically, not enough to protest, but noticeably. The rice isn't quite as fragrant, the soup is thinner, missing the familiar slivers of ginger or ginseng. Dessert becomes fruit, not the soft, sweet kind reserved for favoured men, but the underripe sort that bruises easily and leaves your mouth dry. You're still being fed, of course. This isn't exile, but it's clear you've been moved to a lower tier, one step above, invisible. The portions are enough to sustain you. That's about all they're meant to do. Your schedule begins to shrink. The invitations stop coming. You're no longer asked to participate in music recitals, tea ceremonies, or calligraphy displays. When your master hosts a private banquet for selected concubines, your name isn't included. You're not explicitly told you've been excluded. No one is that cruel, but the silence is confirmation enough. The other boys notice. They don't say anything, but their glances linger a little longer now. Some seem sympathetic, most seem relieved. It means they're still in the running. Eventually you're moved, not far, just a quieter wing of the compound. Technically still within the inner quarters, but it's a different world. The corridors are less polished, the attendants more forgetful, the lanterns don't always get lit on time. Your room is still clean, but the air feels stale, like you're living in the space where importance goes to die. You're still a concubine, still ranked, still breathing, but now you're one of them. The men whose names were once whispered with interest and now aren't whispered at all. You spend your days reading poetry you've already memorized and sewing patterns that no one will ever inspect. The servant assigned to you is polite but distant, as if he's already preparing for his next post. The eunuchs who once nodded at you in the halls no longer acknowledge you. You pass like a shadow through the compound, not unwelcome, but entirely unremarkable. You try to hold your head high. You keep your posture perfect, but it's hard to pretend you're elegant when the room has stopped looking in your direction. Time moves differently now. Hours feel like days. Days blend into each other without markers. You wake up, you dress, you eat, you sit, you sleep. You're still technically part of the rotation, but you haven't been summoned in so long that you've stopped preparing for the possibility. You stopped being nervous weeks ago. You stopped hoping last night. When your name is mentioned at all, it's in the past tense. He was promising. He used to be called often. He had a nice voice. And then there's the moment, the one that seals it, when you catch a glimpse of your master walking through the central garden with a small entourage of favoured concubines. You bow as protocol requires. He passes within feet of you, and he does not look your way. Not because he's avoiding you, but because he doesn't recognise you. You are no longer part of the set. You've become scenery. Elegant, well-trained, obedient, and completely forgettable. You feel something tighten in your chest, but you show nothing. You bow deeper, and when he disappears around the corner, you straighten and continue walking as if nothing inside you has shifted at all. The other men rarely visit. There's no advantage to being seen with you anymore. Whatever status you had is gone, and alliances don't come cheap in the compound. You are not useful. You are not threatening. You are not tragic enough to mourn. You're just there, a story half told, a name that never made it into a ballad. You remember when a new concubine once asked you for advice, back when you still had influence. Now they don't ask you anything. They walk past you with that same half smile you used to give the older men when you first arrived. The one that says, "I hope I don't end up like you." And the thing is, no one warns you about this part. They prepare you for competition, for politics, for the rare and dangerous climb up the ladder. They train you in posture, in voice, in etiquette. But no one teaches you how to fade. No one tells you how to keep existing once the spotlight moves on. You're still breathing, you're still here, but without relevance, without purpose, compound life becomes an echo chamber of your former self, a reflection with no mirror, a performance with no audience. You dream more now, sometimes of home, though that place has likely changed beyond recognition. Sometimes of escape, though you know the gates won't open for you. Mostly, you dream of being noticed, not adored, not even wanted, just seen. But when you wake, there is only silence, the rustle of the trees outside, the soft footsteps of another servant delivering another meal you didn't ask for. You eat, you nod. You say thank you with perfect poise because that's what's left. Poise without purpose, beauty without a gaze, a name still printed on a scroll that no one bothers to read. You've likely wondered by now what happens if you simply walk out. If you leave your quarters, pass through the red gates, and just keep walking until the city swallows you whole. The answer is simple. You don't. Because escape isn't a possibility here. Not practically, not politically, not even conceptually. The compound was designed to keep people out, yes, but more importantly, it was designed to keep people in, especially men like you, whose presence was never meant to extend beyond these carefully curated walls. You are not a guest here. You are a permanent fixture. Theoretically, you might think there's an end to this life, that once your youth fades, once your usefulness wanes completely, you'll be released. But no, retirement in the compound is not freedom. It is simply a different wing, a dimmer corridor, a quieter type of containment. Retired concubines, those who no longer serve, who no longer draw attention or pose any threat, are moved to the outer quarters, affectionately referred to as the Garden of Forgotten Chrysanthemums. There they live, out their days in modest isolation, clothed in simpler robes, their names slowly eroding from household memory, like ink left too long in the sun. Some of these men become harmless elders, content to spend their time reciting poetry and rearranging teacups. Others decline into a state best described as dignified madness. They speak to no one, repeat the same stories to anyone who will listen, or walk the same garden path every day, as if it's still their first year and they've just been chosen for the master's table. No one corrects them. No one comforts them. The staff nods politely, refills their tea, and waits for them to fade further. A few take a different path. Becoming a monk is one of the few sanctioned exits from compound life. It's not glamorous. You shave your head, wear grey robes, and spend your days in contemplation at a temple far from court. But it is quiet, and sometimes quiet is enough. You've heard rumours of men who begged for this transition, offering their jewellery, their influence, even the names of their rivals in exchange for release. Some were granted the request. Others simply disappeared before any vow of poverty could be made. But the ones who try to leave without permission, they don't fare well. Escape attempts are rare, not because no one thinks of it, but because everyone knows the outcome. The last boy who tried it managed to get as far as the outer gardens. He disguised himself in servant's clothing, timed the gates during shift change, and almost made it. Almost. He was caught by a eunuch who recognised his shoes. He was brought back quietly. There was no public scene, just a scroll issued the next morning stating he had been found guilty of disturbing household harmony. His name was struck from the registry by sunset. Execution in the compound is rarely dramatic. No heads on spikes, no public trials. That sort of spectacle is reserved for generals and court officials. For men like you, it's tea, always tea. Brought in a beautiful porcelain cup, set gently beside you by a eunuch with an apologetic smile. You're given the choice to make it graceful, drink quietly, lie down, and allow the poison to do its work, or resist and suffer the consequences. Most don't resist. Resistance only delays the inevitable and makes the death harder to bury politely. What's worse is that you're expected to be grateful for the privacy, for the dignity, for the fact that your master's reputation will remain intact while your existence is quietly scrubbed from official record. Your family, if they're still around, may receive a condolence letter, or they may not. It depends on how politically useful your disappearance is at the time. And yet death isn't always forced. Sometimes it's chosen. You've heard whispers in the laundry halls from older concubines who haven't been summoned in decades. They speak of the slow ache of being forgotten, the way silence can fill your lungs until breathing feels performative. They talk about boys who smiled until they cracked, who sang to themselves until their minds couldn't tell the difference between memory and madness. One of them once said, "They'll never kill me. They just want me to decide when it's time to die." Still, not everyone fades. Some men endure. They become the quiet observers of compound life, the ones who sit near the edges of ceremonial functions and watch without speaking. They've survived scandal, illness, demotion, and the death of any hope for a better room. They live like shadows, drifting along the periphery of power. Occasionally, one of them will lock eyes with a new concubine and give the faintest nod, not a greeting, but a warning. This place does not reward longevity. It merely allows it. You wonder what your end will look like. You try not to, but in the moments between meals and moon phases, your mind drifts there. Will you be one of the quiet ones who fades peacefully into a room no one visits? Will you plead for temple walls and solitude? Will your name vanish from the roster with a single brushstroke? Or will you outlast them all, becoming one of the unmovable fixtures of this compound, no longer desired, but too entrenched to remove? You used to think death was the worst outcome. Now you understand it's just one of many endings. The worst is not being remembered. The worst is knowing you lived an entire life inside these walls, surrounded by opulence and attention, and still left no trace. And the compound doesn't care about your story. It cares about your silence, your obedience, your ability to follow the script even when no one is watching. Escape was never an option, but endurance, that's a choice you make every day. And for now, you choose to stay, because it's all you have left. Your name, if it's ever written down, will be a single line in a long unremarkable ledger, not engraved on stone or whispered by poets, but copied by a bored scribe onto a dusty scroll that no one will read. Entry: male concubine, entered the household in the 35th year of the master's reign. No children, no promotions, no formal demotion, died peacefully. That last part might even be true, in the same way that a candle going out is peaceful. Quiet, unseen, irrelevant. There were thousands like you before you, alongside you, after you. Boys with soft voices and perfect posture. Boys who embroidered swallows onto silk and waited for someone to call their name. Some were clever, some were ruthless, some were just unlucky. A few rose, though fewer than the legends like to suggest, and even they, the rare handful who clawed their way to the highest ranks, were often remembered, not for who they were, but for whose favour they earned, or whose blood they spilled. You won't be one of them, and you've made your peace with that. You no longer rehearse your title in your head, imagining how it might sound if spoken by a eunuch during a festival ceremony. You no longer wonder what it would feel like to be asked to stay the night. You've let those hopes dry out, like pressed flowers in an old book. Still pretty, but no longer alive. What remains now is something simpler. You endure, you continue. You make your bed each morning and smooth the silk with practiced hands. You hold your head high, not because anyone is watching, but because it's the only thing left that feels like yours. Occasionally, a historian might stumble across your name, not as a subject, but as a data point, part of a head count, a logistical footnote in the grand ledger of empire. One of 40 male concubines recorded during a mid-century census. No details, no distinctions, just a number among numbers. It's not malicious, it's not even personal. It's simply the way history works. It remembers power. It forgets the ones who waited just outside the light. But tonight, as you lie in your narrow bed, eyes open to the ceiling that has watched you for years, you allow yourself a small moment of memory. Not grandeur, not legacy, just memory. You remember the sound of your own laughter, not the delicate, measured kind used in the compound, but the full, unguarded sound you used to make before you knew what was expected of you. You remember the scent of your mother's cooking, the texture of grass under your feet, the feeling of running without a destination. These things won't be written down, but they were real. They were yours. You think of the other men, the ones who passed through these corridors like drifting lanterns, glowing briefly, then gone. You remember their smiles, their silence, the soft sound of fabric as they moved past you, never quite touching. You remember the ones who left, the ones who cracked, the ones who disappeared without explanation. Their names may not be spoken, but you carry them with you. You remember them, and in a place that so easily forgets, that's no small act. Your legacy will not be a statue or a scroll or a song. It will be the quiet resilience of having survived something designed to consume you. You were part of a machine built to erase you, and yet you remained. You whispered warnings to the new boys, you passed along safe advice and coded glances, you remembered how to be human in a system that rewards silence and punishes anything louder than a sigh. That may not be power, but it is strength, and that strength was real. Perhaps somewhere far from the capital, a boy not yet born will read about compound life and wonder what it felt like. He'll imagine silk robes and lantern-lit nights, but not the hunger, not the silence, not the years spent waiting for something that never came. He'll picture a world of beauty and ceremony, not realizing that the beauty was a veil and the ceremony a cage. And he will not know your name, but you are real. You lived, you endured, and that matters. The empire will forget you, the records will overlook you, but in this moment, lying still in the dark, listening to the faint rustle of footsteps outside your door, knowing exactly who they belong to and why they don't stop to knock, you understand something deeper than legacy. You understand that your life, though quiet, was part of something vast, a tradition not of glory, but of survival, of men who bore the weight of expectation with straight backs and calm expressions, who navigated impossible choices with nothing but instinct and silence. You are not a legend, you are not a cautionary tale, you are not even an anecdote, but you are here, and if no one else remembers, you do. You close your eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a wind stirs the trees in the compound courtyard. Someone giggles, a newer concubine, still full of dreams. Somewhere, another boy wakes with hope in his chest, thinking tomorrow might be the day he's called. And in your silence, in your stillness, you offer him the only legacy you have left, understanding. The quiet truth that nothing here lasts, not beauty, not favour, not even fear, just memory. Just the echo of men who came before and the ones still to come. The master sleeps in his chambers, dreaming perhaps of silken power. The dowager rests in her opulent suite, her authority undiminished by slumber. The eunuchs patrol the halls, their soft footsteps marking time like a heartbeat. And you lie here, breathing quietly, a ghost in silk robes, a whisper in the grand symphony of empire. You have become what you were always meant to be, beautiful, silent, and utterly disposable. But you have also become something they never intended, enduring. Not in stone or song, but in the simple act of continuing to exist when everything around you was designed to make you disappear. Tomorrow will be like today, and the day after that, until one day it isn't, until your name is quietly removed from the rotation, until your room is given to someone younger, and your story becomes just another cautionary whisper in the halls. But tonight you are still here, still breathing, still remembering, and in a place built to erase memory, That's its own form of rebellion. Sleep well, forgotten prince of silk and shadow. You've earned your rest. And that's the end of tonight's slow spiral through the golden cage of Imperial China's male quarters. From the brutal selection process to the poisoned promotions, from whispered betrayals to legacies erased by design, life as a male concubine was anything but graceful. It was quiet survival wrapped in embroidery, dignity performed in silk, humanity preserved in secret gestures and stolen moments of remembrance. Thanks for drifting through history with me. If you're still awake, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment about which part of compound life would have broken you first. The waiting, the rules, or the slow realization that beauty, no matter how perfect, always fades. Sleep well, and dream of simpler times when your worth wasn't measured in how still you could sit while looking decorative.